1931, $500 buys C. Greer Beam his first truck, a 1.5-ton Chevrolet. It seems to me that most of the great trucking companies started with one man with a vision, a small amount of money, and used trucks. I'm Logan, the 64th Gear Jammer Skeele, and this is Toy Talk. I talk about diecast models, but not just the models. I connect them to the histories of the real vehicles. Many of the trucking companies that I talk about are fallen flags, like Carolina freight carriers. To add fallen flags to your collection, grab my checklist of the DCP by First Gear Fallen Flags series with the link in the description below. Also, be sure to go on and subscribe to not miss any of my upcoming videos. Beam had recently returned to his home in Cherryville, North Carolina. The country was deep in the Depression, but that did not stop Beam from starting one of the biggest trucking companies on the East Coast. In the early days of the Beam Trucking Company, Greer Beam, along with his crew of part-time drivers, would haul whatever they could get paid for. For example, Beam's drivers carried sweet potatoes to Florida and returned with a truckload of tomatoes and other fruits, which they sold to local distributors, and they also peddled them directly to the public from the back of one of their company trucks. That was in 1933. That strategy worked for Beam and his fledgling trucking company. In 1934, things were looking up for the Beam Trucking Company. The company established its first headquarters in a corner of the Shell station that was run by Greer Beam's brother, Guy. Also, they obtained a contract for hauling cotton yarn to New England for Cross Cotton Mills of Marion, North Carolina. Part of the contract included a new truck financed by the owner of Cross Mills. The contract was a real sweet deal. Load yarn at the Cross Mills, drive through West Virginia to Pennsylvania, deliver the yarn, and reload for the return trip with Hershey candy, Valentine beer, and Keystone roofing products that were picked up on the way back. What could be sweeter than that? Uh-oh, here comes the government and the ICC, 1935, and the passage of the Motor Carrier Act. The act established routes trucking companies were restricted to, rates that companies could charge, and driver and vehicle safety regulations. Beam Trucking Company found itself in competition with two other trucking companies. A one-truck operation run by Cone Beam and another company, Mountie Transfer. In 1936, the two beams merged, and they purchased, with two other partners, the struggling Mountie Transfer Company in 1937. The partners adopted a new corporate name, Carolina Freight Carriers Corporation. The Mountie Transfer acquisition was the key to growth because Mountie Transfer had filed with the Interstate Commerce Commission under the terms of the Motor Carrier Act. With the takeover of Mountie, the fledgling Carolina freight carriers obtained Mountie's authorization to operate on Mountie's routes. Carolina's operating territory was expanded. A side note here, guys, mergers and acquisitions during the tenure of the 1935 Motor Carrier Act were the fastest way to grow service territory for a trucking company. By the end of 1937, all of the partners except Greer Beam had given up on the company and sold their shares to Beam. Carolina Freight became a family business in 1938. With a sum of money borrowed from Sally Beam, the company bought a small piece of land in Cherryville, North Carolina, and built its first real office, loading dock, and maintenance shop. Expansion was rapid. World War II increased the trucking industry's workload sharply in the early 1940s. Carolina Freight, like other companies, received government contracts. Carolina Freight continued to grow by mergers and acquisitions. Operating authority to several towns in North and South Carolina, as well as to Richmond, Virginia, Philadelphia, Jersey City, and New York were added this way. The operating rights of Jennings S. Edmunds was purchased. Included in these rights were areas in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and Virginia. With the acquisition of this southern gateway, Carolina Freight became the only motor carrier operating along nearly the entire east coast of the United States, from Key West, Florida, to the New England states. In 1958, Carolina purchased the operating authority of Marion Freight Lines, which opened up a large portion of North Carolina. By that year, the company's fleet consisted of over 800 pieces of equipment. It operated 36 terminals and call stations in 14 eastern seaboard states. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, saw Carolina Freight growing steadily. During this period of growth, Carolina ventured into the Midwest. By 1970, Carolina Freight became one of the 20 largest general freight carriers in the United States. In 1971, Carolina Freight stock was first traded on the New York Stock Exchange. The government again entered the trucking industry with the ending of the ICC's reign of control with the passage of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. The enactment of this act had a major impact on most trucking companies, reducing the full truckload market of larger companies by deregulating the trucking industry and giving companies more freedom in pricing, expansion, and market entry. Many truck lines did not survive the act. Others flourished and grew, like Carolina Freight. Still, new carriers entered the already highly competitive trucking market. By 1980, Carolina Freight was committed to LTL freight. LTL refers to cargo shipments of less than 10,000 pounds, or 1/4 of the actual capacity of most van trailers. LTL operations consolidate these smaller shipments into full trailer loads using a system of centrally located terminals. Carolina Freight continued to grow at a rapid pace. However, while growth is good for a company, rapid growth without focus is not. Eventually, the uncontrolled growth caused Carolina Freight to fail in profitability and slowly slide toward a future bankruptcy. Before troubled Carolina Freight went into bankruptcy, Arkansas Best Freight bought Carolina and all of its assets in 1995. ABF continued to operate Carolina for a short time after the purchase, but eventually shuttered the doors on Carolina Freight for good, thus ending a giant in the trucking industry. Now, let's jump over to the rock quarry and talk about a model from a toy maker that I have not talked about before.
And guys, if you are looking for a classic set that you would have seen on the highways in the late 70s and 80s, this would be it. a Ford L9000 pulling doubles for Carolina. This was been a very common sight on the eastern seaboard and the Midwest. They're black over red, which is a theme from the NC State, North Carolina State University's Wolf Pack, and their paint scheme. A kind of cool note about this paint scheme, that red is actually trademarked for the Carolina Wolf Pack, and they had to get permission to use it. And he was a big fan, so that's what he did, so he could use that red on his trucks. And that's where his red paint job came from. And this set is not in 64th, it's not in 50th, it's in 153rd, which is Tonkin's scale. I'm going to pick this guy up. Now, these trucks and these trailers were not the easiest to unhitch because they used a locking kingpin. You can see how the kingpin right there has the T shape to it, so that it would lock into either the converter dolly or the truck. And even worse, the kingpin could actually rotate a little bit, so that it would be even harder to tell exactly where that turn point is, instead of staying at 90 degrees like it should have been. You can see this is an old Fruhoff trailer, and there's the Fruhoff logo right there. It has Carolina in big red letters with black stroke around them, so that they've got a nice black outline. Looks really sharp. Great rivet detail on the sides and the exterior type posts that are running down the side. Great rivet detail here. Now note, no DOT striping. Back then, there was no DOT striping. It was not required and didn't even exist. You have underneath landing gear, which is in a fixed position. It doesn't go up or down, it's fixed up. It's got round feet instead of square feet, which most of your LTL pup trailers at that time had round feet on them. So that's very accurate of late 80s. And then the posts are actually round as well, where most trucks today and even then had square posts. These round ones were really, they stuck out. It has hard plastic tires and wheels. They're hard rubber, and then the wheels are plastic. Not the greatest detail on that wheel, but again, this is the late 80s, so that wasn't really, just as long as it had a nice looking, a semblance of a wheel was good enough for then. It has hard plastic mud flaps, and they are molded in white to be white Carolina mud flaps. Underneath, it has all red except for the kingpin. They didn't paint, they just left it cast. But you can see the rib detail and the ladder frame underneath the trailer, and then there's a casting mark. This trailer is all diecast. The base is diecast, the sides are diecast, the axles are diecast, but the ICC bumper back here and the mud flaps are all plastic. Round to the back. The bumper piece right here, all of this red right in here is just one big plastic molded piece. Brake lights are there, brake lights are there. An interesting note about these, the latch for the trailer door actually works, but the door doesn't. Funny, huh? The door doesn't. However, what that does is it will actually work down, and it'll hold the hitch on the converter dolly. The Lynette ring, it'll keep it down on that pin, which is where it hooks up. This trailer has the white mud flaps with Carolina written on both of them. Then you can see how Carolina has that great big number, trailer number, and 27-0100, and then Carolina written there. Fruhoff logo is there. It has what would be a placard holder for any type of hazmat type placards, and some other places. Then you can see it is a multi-panel roll-up door. Classic of LTL trucks, didn't have these outer corner roof marker lights. It just had the 3 round ones in the center above the door. Now this is just a decal, and it looks like it is applied just a little bit off center too, but that's not a problem. Round on that passenger side of the trailer looks just like the driver's. These were great trailers, and the diecast models that Tonkin made are a great representation of that trailer. It would have been nice if the back door opened, but not necessary. And remember, this is a very old model, so it wasn't the standard then anyway. And you can see how the landing gear doesn't work. No big deal. Most of the time, we're just going to leave these hitched up to the truck anyhow. There is the converter dolly. It has a 5th wheel on it. It's one diecast piece with plastic wheels and tires. They're the same wheel and tire that's on the trailer. And then it has a little peg here, which is kind of like the landing gear, because these trailers had a bit of a landing gear, but mostly you just picked them up and dropped them. The tongue hit the ground. No problem on these old converter dollies. And then it also has a spare tire mounted on the back. I'm not sure how many converter dollies actually carried a spare tire then, but this one's got one. Both trailers share the same trailer number. Kind of a bummer that they didn't put 2 different numbers on, but at the same time I know why. That would require a separate tampo process, which they didn't do back then. They do it now on most double sets, but back in the 80s and 90s they didn't bother. They just put the same number on both trailers. Still looks cool, and you really can't tell if you got it hitched up anyway, because you can't see the first number most of the time. Now let's look at the tractor. Isn't that fancy for an 80s model? Maybe an early 90s. It is probably one of the better renditions of the Ford L9000, and it has a set back front axle. You can see how the front bumper is angled there because they set the axle back and then they carved the corner off to make it easier to steer and drive and maneuver. Fender is there. This is the longer hood version, and then it has the molded in for the hood latch there. It has on the door the Carolina Freight Carriers logo, Cherryville, North Carolina, and it has its ICC MC number of 2253 right there, and that's the Carolina logo. Really cool paint scheme that Carolina had. Fuel tank is here with 2 steps, one back, one forward, door latch, mirror, and it has no actual door handle. Well, there's a molded grab bar right there. Battery box is right there. Rides on the hard plastic tires and hard plastic rims that are just painted red. Most of your LTLs in the time ran painted wheels. They didn't run a aluminum wheel. They ran a body matched painted wheel, and a lot of them ran body painted frames, but Carolina ran the black frame. It matched with their paint scheme. Inside the cab, there's a dashboard and 2 seats, and that's basically it. Not much of anything. The headlights here are individual pieces, and they're just chrome plated plastic, but they look really nice. You can see the bumper, which is chrome plated, and it has the angles on both sides. Then they painted the grille silver, while the rest of the around it is red. The real ones, it was a chrome plated plastic, but they just painted it silver. That's okay. Up on the hood, you can see the mold detail and the lines that were on the Ford L9000 hood. Hard plastic windows. No windshield wipers, but it does have the cowl grill right there. Up on the roof, single air horn over here. No, 2 bell air horn over here, and then your 5 roof lights, 3 in the center, 1 on each side, and they're molded in. Now what's kind of unique about the Carolina versus all the rest is the Carolina had this kind of fold-up style airfoil on the roof, whereas all the rest of them had a molded version. And that I've ever seen of these trucks from Tonkin, and I've seen a lot of them, they all had a molded version airfoil here instead of this just fold up style, which is really cool. Passenger side, you can see how it's that fold up style. It's got a mirror, a logo on the door handle, fuel tank with steps, and the passenger side of these trucks had this really cool air intake piece right here to take the air into the engine. Really sweet. Onto the back, not a lot of detail, but we'll tip him up. Does have a nice back of the cab detail that these Ford 9000s had, and it has a back window. Fifth wheel, nothing to write home about. It's all one solid chassis. But still, it hitches up and holds the trailers pretty nice. Underneath, again, not much detail. No real suspension, no nothing. It's just a plastic piece and a die-cast piece. But it does have some castings in it. It says Tonkin Inc. Made in China cast right there. You can also see how the axles are a little wide and kind of flop around. Not so great, but remember this is a 1980s piece. Now let's go on and hitch this set back up. And I've got other Carolina trucks that I'm going to talk about in future videos, so please subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single one of those videos. There we go. And that is a blast from the past, back from the 1980s to maybe even the early 1990s. A Tonkin Ford L9000 setback front axle, single rear axle, with double Fruhoff trailers for Carolina freight carriers of Cherryville, North Carolina. A very, very hard set to come by today. It's a die-cast with some plastic parts, and it's a 1/53rd scale, so I know it's an odd scale. Let me know what you guys think of 1/53rd in the comments below, and let me know what you think of this particular truck.
What did you think of the history of Carolina freight? Let me know down in the comments. Also, did you like that very vintage Tonkin model that I talked about? I have a couple of other Tonkins that I could talk about in future videos, so just go on and let me know. Don't forget to grab the DCP by First Gear Fallen Flags checklist so that you can make sure you get all of these great models of trucks for your collection. Use the link in the description below to get it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please be sure to smash that like button to help me out with the YouTube algorithm. Share this video with your friends and your followers, and subscribe for more great diecast and reviews and histories of the real machines. I'm Logan, the 64th Gear Jammer Skeele, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Toy Talk.